Right, greetings, hello, it's Dr. Thomas Daffern here. It's my normal Sunday fasting talk. Pleasure to welcome you. And this time I'm in the room of Euterpe in the Museum of the Muses here in France. And I'm looking out over the hills of La Creuse, this beautiful department of France. Actually, it's a place where lots of artists used to come. Some of the great impressionists would come and do paintings because it's so physically beautiful. And that's still a living tradition. We have artists coming here, and virtually every other person seems to be an artist in this part of France. And that means like sculpture, painting, and all the rest of it. I suppose I would classify myself as a peace artist. I haven't specialised in painting, although when I was little, obviously I enjoyed it and went to art classes and was not too bad. I probably could have become an artist, but I decided that I would specialise in generalist things. And I worked more with words and with poetry, and I'm an artist with words. But I still love the visual arts, and I have a great respect for artists because of their patience and their eye for detail and so on. So this room, Euterpe, is full of art objects, paintings. It also houses the photographic collection of the museum, which is quite extensive. We have the family archive of all the Daffern photographs going back to like my mother and father. And my mother's photos start in like 1920 with her as a young girl at school. And then her travels around Australia and New Zealand and the world. So there's a large photographic collection. There's also a large DVD and film collection in this room because it's documentary films that Nicola has made and other colleagues, and I have a large teaching documentary library, so films like Palestine 101, which is an archive film of the history of Palestine told by Palestinians since the beginning when the Ottomans were in charge, and it's rare footage, film footage, telling the story of Israel's arrival and occupation and from their perspective, right? And then I have other films like Schindler's List that tell the tragedy of the Holocaust, and these I've used in teaching in my active career as a teacher, because I think film's a really important medium. One of my professors, Anthony Polonsky, who was a Jewish professor of history, taught me at the London School of Economics. He was an expert in film as a resource for 20th century history. It's very important. So we have all that here. Today we have a visiting artist who's going to be talking shortly from Syria, which is great fun. This room should always be occupied by a visiting artist. And we're busy on some work to do with actually designing a tarot pack. I'm not going to say what kind because that's too secret, but she's brilliant at designing the tarot images. And I'm doing the text. So this is all very exciting. I'm going to start with a poem, as is my wont. And you see, I do think that poetry is quite visual. And we have in the human mind this capacity to visualize things. That is the miracle of what it is to be human. I can see pictures in my mind. Mm-hmm. I don't know where that comes from. It's to me, divine gift that we have. And it enables all higher culture and thought to arise out of that. One of my favourite philosophers, Hegel, wrote a huge book about aesthetics, the history of art. And he said you could tell the main foci of different cultures from their art history. So he gave a series of lectures at the University of Berlin, which are really important. And if you've not read Hegel's Aesthetics, you should, because every philosopher should know about these. They're verbatim lectures recorded. And he was a genius because he encompassed all art history. But of course now it's, 100 years later, there's more to try and encompass. So the work goes on. And yes, I think the key thing is that art is trying to find beauty and pattern and design in nature and in visuality. And that's what philosophers are trying to do. We're trying to find meaning, pattern and design in reality. And where it comes from. Here's a poem by Rilke, one of my favourite poets, a German poet. And it's from the Sonnets to Orpheus. And the other thing I'm sharing is that Yesterday we had a meeting for the action group of the Delphic Council, which I'm the education officer, proud to be. The Delphic Games are parallel to the Olympic Games. We've just seen the end of the Olympic Games. Great, thank you very much. Athletes doing their thing. The Delphic Games were different. They were the intellectual games. They were for the artists, the poets, the musicians, the dancers in ancient Greece. For 1,000 years they ran. And Pindar, the great poet, one of the many who inspired me to become a poet, he used to go and he would write poems about the victors, the Delphic Games, the Pythian Games they're called. Well, we want to revive them, and my friend in Berlin, Christian Kirsch, is Secretary General of the International Delphic Council, and the fine arts will have a category. They will be, awarding to artists now, the next generation, upcoming artists, maybe indigenous artists who are working with traditional design and pattern and so on. Human creativity is what is at stake here. And for me, peace will only come when we unleash the power of human creativity for good. Everyone wants to be some kind of an artist or poet or thinker or, we don't want to be killers. It's not really in our nature. And we've ended up with this robot international military system that privileges war. And as I'm speaking in Afghanistan, the Taliban army, who are just warriors, they don't know who they're working for actually. They think they're working for Allah, but actually it's not Allah. It's the military establishment that created them in the beginning, way back. And it's like a bad karmic sequence. So now they're terrorizing the people of Kabul, and they're going to banish all art. They're going to stop all, you can take this to a ridiculous extent. They're going to banish everything that's visual. Well, I think that's a total misreading of the Quran in my commentary on the Quran. That's not what either Allah or Muhammad intended. Muhammad loved beauty. He was a great lover of women. He loved sunsets. He loved the beauty of nature, like all of us do. So this anti-aesthetic terrorism that's going on is a whole new phenomena. It's fake Islam. But unfortunately, the West encouraged it and sponsored it, and the Americans, who don't have a clue as to ethics anymore, it seems to me, in their international military elites, created this monster. And they spent more than $1 trillion. I don't know what they've been doing in Afghanistan for 20 years, but they've not been creating peace. And as I said to my colleague, active in war studies, Professor Friedman, who runs the War Studies Department at King's, I said, look, war studies great, victory, militarism, fantastic, but what we really need to privilege is peace studies, because unless we know how to bring peace to a country, what's the point in conquering it? I mean, the British Army is very powerful, it has super weapons, we could conquer most countries on earth, but we can't bring peace to them. America, doubly so. So we failed the last 20 years, the people of Afghanistan, because we don't know how to build peace. Now, I would begin with art. I would begin with culture and education. I would have spent those $1 trillion on building up the education system of Afghanistan, working with Islamic scholars to bring out a moderate, inspirational view of Islam. I would have sponsored the Sufis to teach and explore their commentaries. I would have got Shias and Sunnis working together on joint commentaries on the Quran, so they agree. This is divinely inspired. It's awesome, and this is the jewels of meaning that we can give to the young Afghans. And we should have given them the best bits of Western thought, which is like Goethe and Plato and Kant and Hegel and all the great geniuses of the Western mind, Shakespeare and Francis Bacon and so on, as an adjunct to help them be better Muslims, because Western thought is tremendous too. I love it. And the greatest Islamic minds of modern times have taken from Western ideas and then applied them to the advancement of their own Islamic faith. And that was done in Egypt. It was done by Muhammad Abdu and Al-Afghani, the great philosopher who taught in Cairo, using Western scholarship to develop Islamic intellectual work. So that's what should have been done with those trillions of dollars, but of course nobody's listened to me and my Peace Institute. They listened to Professor Lawrence Friedman and his War Studies Centre, which is just about how many bombs we need to kill how many people. forgive me, Lawrence, I know it's a bit more sophisticated, but all studies at the end of the day is about war. And that is what I'm trying to prevent. So, anyway, there's my preamble. That's why the arts are important. This is a matter of life and death to the people of Kabul as we sit here in peaceful France. These my dear friends in Afghanistan are terrified at what's about to happen. I would say to the Taliban, go away, listen to my commentary on the Quran. Don't terrorize these people for their aesthetic nature. We all love beauty, we all love art. And it's our right to have that experience. It's part of the human beings. A carte, health pass, a carte de sanitaire, or whatever you want to call it, metaphysically. So anyway, that's my preamble. Now, let's go back to some more detailed stuff. I want to share this poem. As educational director of the Delphic Games and as a poet, I love Orpheus. Orpheus was trained in Delphi. He's from about 800 BC. He was a real person, a poet and a musician. And we all know the tragic story. He loved his wife Eurydice so much. She was captured by the god of the underworld, Pluto, who had her stung by a snake and taken into the underworld. But Orpheus loved her so much, he got permission to go down to get her back. And he could sing his music so beautifully that it tamed the guardians of hell, Cerberus. And he got down, and Pluto and Persephone, who was there, she's there half the year, agreed to let Orpheus take Eurydice to the surface, but he could lead her only. She couldn't walk in front, and he wasn't allowed to look behind. Now, it's like, why? What's that motif in the myth? That's like a dream where there's a sort of a geish, there's like a taboo thing, and of course that's the thing you end up doing. And so he's not supposed to look behind, but of course right at the last minute he does, and then he loses his wife forever. She's tragically taken back down into the underworld. What's the origin of that story? Well, I'm exploring that at the moment actually in a novel I'm writing, and they have discovered, I don't know if you know this, but this is really interesting. Mm-hmm. In the museum in Thessalonica, there is a papyrus text which was found in a tomb, which is writing about the Orphic view of life, the universe, and the afterlife. And so it's the oldest written text surviving in Europe. 230 BC, they've dated it, this ancient writing. And it's about the Orphic mysteries. The Orphic mysteries are incredibly important to our ancestors in the classical world. And they were very similar, I've argued and researched, to the Druid mysteries. Mm-hmm. Orpheus came from Bulgaria, Thrace, which is north of Greece. And they, in turn, were in touch with the Celtic tribes on the Danube, who were in Austria and elsewhere. So there was a lot of mingling between Celtic Druids and Thracians about the afterlife. The Druids are the masters of travelling between the worlds, just as Orpheus was. So these Orphic mysteries came into Greece, and they inspired in turn. And he was at Delphi training, because Delphi was there since 1500 BC. It was a sacred site, a temple. Now that's as old as, the later parts of Stonehenge. Mm. So when Stonehenge was there, people by Druids and Avebury, they would have been visiting Delphi, in my opinion, on peace missions. Later, the silly Celts then went and invaded and tried to pinch the treasure, but that was just a mad Celtic leader, Brenos. He didn't have authority from the Druids to do that. So there's a lot of intellectual exchange. And the Orphic traditions then inspired Pythagoras. The Pythagorean tradition we know were in touch with the Celts. Abaris was his friend, mentor, colleague. He was a Celtic Druid, very possibly from Britain, it's not known where. He was from Hyperborea, which means beyond the north wind, almost certainly Britain somewhere. And Pythagoras in turn, who founded the Pythagorean order, that inspired the Platonic tradition of the Academy. Plato was a Pythagorean. You have to read the Timaeus, read the details. Plato spent ages chasing after lost texts from Pythagoras. Pythagoras coined the word philosophy. And Plato then built a home for it. He built the Academy outside the walls of Athens in a forest grove, which tragically, symbolically, think about that, because the forests on the edge of Athens are now burning. Poor old Plato would be turning in his grave. In his day, these were places of cool trees, shade. You went and discussed philosophy. He would be working full out with the Global Green University, trying to get intellectuals focusing on solving the causes of global warming. Not just tinkering with gas emissions and technical stuff, but changing the way we think about nature. If we realise its sacredness, we won't be so keen to destroy the environment. And we'll invent technologies that, we can generate electricity from hydrogen, for God's sake, from water, and from solar energy, and we don't need these dangerous energy sources. So anyway, that's my little prayer in honour of Pythagoras and Orpheus.
Thank you.
And here is a poem from Sonnets to Orpheus by Rilke. Rilke, the great German poet. Mm-hmm. Erect no gravestone to his memory. Just let the rose blossom each year for his sake. For it is Orpheus. Wherever he has passed, through this or that, we do not need to look for other names. Where there is poetry, it is Orpheus singing. He lightly comes and goes. Isn't it enough if sometimes he can stay with us a few days longer than a rose? Though he himself is afraid to disappear, he has to vanish. Don't you understand? The moment his word steps out beyond our life here, he moves where you will never find his trace. The lyre strings do not constrict his hands, and it is in overstepping that he obeys. So that's a beautiful poem. I was invited to the Struga Poetry Festival, not far from there, in Macedonia, Lake Ohrid. And one year it was dedicated to Orpheus and Jesus, and the comparisons and similarities. I mean, Jesus is very much like an Orpheus figure. And the people that became Christian originally were Orphics. And the Christian mysteries at their best are really recapitulations of the Orphic mysteries, because going into the underworld and coming back out is the death and rebirth mystery. And I wrote a poem, I wrote a whole series of poems there, and that's what inspired me to set up my order of wandering peace poets, bards and druids, which is still going. It's run from Thalia, the room I was working in last couple of weeks. So now I want to move on and share a couple of other things before we ask my Syrian friend to speak. I just want to remind people that I live very close to where Leonardo da Vinci spent his last years, here in France.
Where exactly?
At Amboise, in a chateau. It's called Chateau Clos de Lucht. And here's the brochure about it all. And he had a studio there. So he didn't do much actual new painting because he was quite old. He was given a sort of, this is his rather splendid bedroom, you can see that. And it is to die for. It's a palace of treasures. If you ever get to visit me here in France, then you have to go to this place. And on the bottom, in the basement, they built an amazing museum of all the objects he designed, which they've made models of, which are working, because he designed the helicopter and all kinds of things, trying to get people to fly, like early aeroplane type things. So they made these models that are actually working in the basement. Unfortunately, he had to devote quite a lot of his life to military inventions, because he was paid by the Duke of Milan, who was a great military figure. And so he designed the machine gun and underwater submarines and all kinds of things. He had to work for the military. Mm-hmm. So when I went to Amboise, and looked around. I spent the whole day there. That's the castle, close to the Chateau Lucht. That's the castle, which is overlooking the Loire Valley. And he often went to see the king, Francois Premier, who was the king that brought the Renaissance to France. And his most important thing really was doing that. The culture of the court was highly sophisticated, and what Leonardo wanted above all was peace, which is why he painted his masterpieces. He thought the human form as a symbol of the divine intelligence, so he measured the human form exactly, among the first of painters to do so, and he worked out the proportions are according to sort of inner laws of the mathematics of nature. And his paintings, his use of perspective, again, they follow certain mathematical laws. If you look at them closely, and scientists have studied these, for the arrangement of the pictures. This is the famous Annunciation by Gabriel to the Virgin Mary. Again, it's all very carefully crafted mathematically. Leonardo knew quite a lot about mathematics, and he had a big library of mathematical books, including some in Arabic. And I was fascinated when I went to an exhibition in Dublin at the ancient library in Dublin, which houses these things. Mm-hmm. They had an exhibition of what Leonardo da Vinci's library was like, because they had a manuscript that, an original manuscript on display of one of his notebooks, and he kept all this stuff in great detail. Yeah, here's a picture that shows Bacchus, the god of, Dionysus, the Greek god of the mysteries. And interestingly, by the way, in Delphi, it was felt that Apollo was there most of the time, but in the winter, Apollo went north to the Hyperborean lands of Stonehenge and Avebury, and Bacchus, or Dionysus, took over charge of Delphi. Bacchus, we call him in English, or Dionysus. He was the god of the mysteries.
With us, I think, with wine.
And also wine, yeah, because the wine was used in the mysteries in moderation, which is why Christ used it in his sacraments. You get a little sip of wine if you go to the Christian mysteries, which is a sign that this is in the lineage of Dionysus and Bacchus. Right. And this painting by John the Baptist of Bacchus is quite amazing, really. And of course we all know the Mona Lisa, which is one of the most famous paintings in the world, which he brought with him from Italy. He came here on horseback, all the way from Milan, crossed the Alps, passed probably my village, and then went on to the Loire Valley. And he had the Mona Lisa on a mule, looked after, wrapped up carefully. And that's how it came to France. That's why it's still here, in the Louvre. So I want to just share a couple of things, because he was also a philosopher, Leonardo. This is a new biography that I recommend by Walter Isaacson, which goes into his life in great detail, and I've read the whole thing carefully. He wasn't a learned, university-educated man. Leonardo was born to... His mother was a beautiful young goddess who came from near Florence, fell in love with the father, who was a notary, like a lawyer, and they had a love child, which was Leonardo. Completely not, supposed to be done, but that's what human nature does. We fall in love, and it happens mysteriously, like a thunderbolt. And so Leonardo was brought up in the country at his mother's place, and he had the run of nature. He was always exploring the fields, the forests, the streams, and he loved nature. And he drew and kept diaries from an early age. And then his father took some responsibility and took him to Florence and had him schooled and educated by a famous artist. He joined the atelier of an art master who was also a goldsmith. And he was taught all the technical skills to do with painting and craftsmanship, because art is a science as well. And that's where he learned mathematics and how to measure perspectives and all that kind of stuff. And his life, but he never lost that childlike innocence and delight in looking at nature, how it is. Because nature is the greatest of artists.
Right.
We humans just try and recapitulate it. And that led him to look at anatomy. He wanted to know what goes on behind the skin, how are muscles formed, all that kind of stuff. Which led him to scientific discoveries. He had a restless, omnivorous mind, and he was trying to find the beauty behind everything. And then the most amazing thing happened towards the end of his life. He'd spent his whole life looking for the patterns of beauty in life. And then when he was dying, he was crying, and the king was there, Francis, and said to him, "Leonardo, why are you crying?" And Leonardo looked at him and said, "King, because I feel I've wasted my life. I haven't done half of what I wanted to do. Here I am dying, and I've still got a million projects on the go. It's too early to die. I haven't finished them all. And I'm crying because of my grief that I've been so lazy and haven't finished everything." And so it's all these things undone that I'm crying about. And, the thing is, the king comforted him, surrounded by the courtiers and all that. And they said, "Look, Leonardo, you've done enough. You can go now. You've left things for us to do. Other people will come later and finish it off." But it's a very moving story, and I call that Leonardo's tears. If we don't die crying for the things we should have done, then we haven't lived a proper life. We should all strive to do 10 times as much as we can do, because even if we just do a little bit, then we've done a lot. And so that's what I wanted to say about Leonardo and how he inspires peace work. This is the Vitruvian Man, which is the famous, he felt the human proportions show in that beauty, both male and female. Okay, so
That's good, thank you.
I'm coming towards the end now, because I want to let my Syrian friend speak. I'm going to just say a couple more things to finish. So, to me, peacemaking is also an art form, as I said. Mediation, juggling conflicting energies, juggling conflicts between 3 groups that all think they're right. Like if you put me in charge in Afghanistan and said, the UN sent me as a special envoy and said, go make peace in Afghanistan, I think I could do it, even at this last minute, because I am like the Leonardo da Vinci of peace, right? I know I could do it because I understand the language of all the competing groups. I could talk to the Taliban and explain to them how to live in peace with other types of Afghans, Afghanistan is a rich, complex culture with many different tribal groups and so on. Different types of Islam. There are Sufis, there are Shias, there are Sunnis. No one group has the authority to dominate and tell everyone else what to do. There has to be a central federal government that tolerates and allows that individuality to flourish. And, I've known Afghans from all different backgrounds. The error is when one group takes over and thinks we're the only way. And that was the error of the communists. That's why the whole thing went wrong in the beginning. The communist vision was, we'll all do it our style. We'll have a Bolshevik Afghanistan. Well, that didn't sit very well with people. But the alternative isn't to say, well, we'll have a Taliban form of Afghanistan. No, that's not the answer either. So you have to make a sort of a piece that juggles all these complex cultural differences and creates a harmony. It's like making a painting. And I know it's possible, and there are, peace studies experts who can do this. But of course the official military, NATO types, don't actually really want, they haven't got the imagination. So when I interviewed Professor Lawrence Friedman about peace studies, he said to me, peace? What's peace? It doesn't exist. It's a professor at King's College who's now on the Privy Council and was on the Chilcot Commission of Inquiry into Iraq. He said, peace doesn't exist. And only war exists. Now, you see, that shows a failure of imagination. Those are the kind of people that run Western policy. Those are the kind of people that have been advising our Afghan policy, which is to spend money and throw it into the desert, not invest in peace, you see. So if they'd have actually if they'd have listened to people who actually know what peace policy is, I run the only Centre for Peace Policy Studies in the world, apart from a little bit going on at Notre Dame University in America. We should have peace policy experts in every university, in Syria, in Iraq, in Israel and Palestine. So that's why I wrote this book on peace between Israel and Palestine. To me, it's an aesthetic challenge. I'm an artist of peace. I want to create a peace that the Israelis and the Palestinians will both love. And that requires mixing the paints, doing the architecture of the peace deal in such a way that they both get the maximum amount they can from a compromise. Nobody can get everything. The only way is to murder and slaughter and genocide the other lot. Well, that can't work. That's what Hitler tried. Look what happened. That's what Genghis Khan tried, or Tamerlane. They conquered a city, killed everyone, and built mountains of skulls. That's not peace, and that's not the aesthetics of peace. That's war studies. So, in my commentary on the Trump-Netanyahu peace plan, which I've totally revoked, changed, and altered, I've gone through it like an artist and said, this is ugly, that's not good, but this is beautiful. Because to me, peace is beautiful. It is the basis of all beauty. Art doesn't flourish except when people are at peace. Love doesn't flourish except when people are at peace. And families can't flourish. Wealth can't flourish. Culture can't flourish. And mosques and churches and temples can't be built when there's war. So that's why, to me, peace is an aesthetic challenge.
Yes, may I ask you a question?
Go for it, yes.
So now the big problem nowadays, and
Yeah.
I would speak from also my generation and my insights to life now, the beauty is no more exist. And the people cannot see the beauty as well. That's the question. How people now can see or say that's beauty, that's ugly. And what's the reason behind it? The people really don't see that this is beauty, or figure out that's beauty, that's ugly. Where's the problem? The origin of the problem comes now. Who you blame, or how we can help people to see this?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think I would probably dissent from the extremism of the question. I'd say in many people the idea of beauty does exist still. I think it's innate in human beings. My daughters have this sense of beauty. They gravitate to beautiful things in nature, and they like to wear nice clothes, and they go to art exhibitions, and they have an innate sense of understanding what beauty is. And I think it comes from their own spiritual conscience. It comes from God, if you want. And I think it's there innate in all human beings. The question then becomes, why is it suppressed and silenced in some people? If you live with terror, fear, anxiety, constant not knowing how you're going to eat tomorrow, not knowing where you're going to sleep tonight, not knowing if your girlfriend is going to get out of the country or not, and millions of people are in that existential anxiety at the moment. Mm-hmm. And at the moment they don't even know if their home's going to be burned, or the level of shock that we're being subjected to, and also the pandemic. We literally don't know if we're going to get this Delta variant next week and die 2 weeks later. I have a friend here in France who had a good friend who got it 2 weeks ago, and then 2 weeks later he's dead. Now we don't know that could happen to any of us. So we're living in this sort of existential dread. Now my strategy is and then our education system is failing us, because I think education is the key place where you activate this moral conscience in people, young people, by teaching philosophy, spirituality, and art.
Yes.
And unfortunately, education has been turned into sort of robot practice, where it's done for computers, by computers, and it's marked by computers. And it's turning people into like little computer zombies. And computers are neutral. They don't have an aesthetic sense of beauty. YouTube will show something if it's ugly and violent and gang rape, or if it's a beautiful piece of music by Tchaikovsky, or a great painting by Kandinsky, and